We've all seen the tears, the gut-wrenching performance of a mother torn apart. We watched Sahna cry to Amit, her dutiful son, painting Sumit as a traitor who had shattered their family, a renegade who threw away tradition for a foreign woman old enough to be his mother. She pitted brother against brother, a classic tactic of a master manipulator, pulling one son closer to cast the other one out into the cold. But we have to ask the question, who is she really fighting for? Herself? Her family's honor? Or something far more calculated? Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a shocking insider report, complete with a leaked audio recording that reveals her favorite son was never a person. It was always just the one who was most useful to her. Before we expose this bombshell, do me a favor. If you love digging deeper into the 90-day universe and uncovering the stories the producers don't show you, hit that like button right now, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of the evidence we're about to lay out. For years, the narrative has been simple, almost painfully so. Sahna, the traditional Indian matriarch, was devastated by her son Sumit's choice. He fell in love with Jenny, an American woman 30 years his senior, a choice that flew in the face of every cultural and societal expectation Sahna held dear. We saw her public breakdowns, her threats of disownment, her refusal to accept Jenny into the family. On the surface, it's a story of a mother's broken heart, a clash of generations, a struggle between love and duty. We were led to believe that Sumit was the favored son, the golden child whose betrayal cut the deepest. He was the one she had the highest hopes for, and his rebellion was a personal, devastating blow. Amit, the other son, was always presented as the more traditional, the more stable one. He was the one who stayed in line, the one who tried to mediate, the one who ultimately sided with his parents. Sahna leaned on him, confided in him, and praised him for his loyalty. He became, by default, the new favorite son, the one who hadn't disappointed her. That was the story. That was the illusion. And tonight, we are going to shatter it completely. Our insider report comes from a source so deep within the family, their perspective changes everything. We're talking about someone who has had a front row seat to the private meltdowns, the whispered phone calls, the moments when the cameras weren't rolling and the masks came off. This isn't speculation from a random blogger. This is a picture painted by someone who has lived inside the suffocating drama of Sahna's world. The source, as we've confirmed through channels we must protect, is Amit's own wife. For the sake of this report, we'll call her Priya. Priya watched for years as her husband was caught in the crossfire, but more recently she witnessed a disturbing shift. As Sumit drew his line in the sand with Jenny, Sahna's attention pivoted to Amit with an intensity that was both flattering and terrifying. Suddenly, Amit could do no wrong. He was the responsible son, the good husband, the one who understood family. Sahna's praise was relentless, a constant stream of validation that Amit had secretly craved his entire life. He had always lived in Sumit's shadow, the charismatic, daring, and yes, more favored brother. Now the tables have turned. Amit was the hero, and Sumit was the villain. But Priya saw something else. She saw that the praise wasn't love, it was leverage. Every compliment was followed by a request. Every kind word was a down payment on a future task. You are such a good son, Amit, which is why you must talk to your brother. You understand honor, unlike him, so you need to make him see. I can only rely on you now. She was building him up, not to celebrate him, but to weaponize him. He wasn't her son, he was her soldier in a war against his own brother. The constant pressure was wearing Amit down, poisoning the brotherly bond that, despite everything, had always existed. Priya saw her husband becoming an extension of his mother's will, a puppet dancing on the strings of her approval. She grew tired of the drama, of the endless circular arguments that always ended with her husband feeling guilty and his mother feeling vindicated. She knew Sahna's affection was a performance, but she lacked the proof. Until one afternoon, the scene, as described to us, was mundane. Sahna was visiting Amit and Priya's home. She was on the phone with her sister, believing she was alone and speaking freely. Priya was in the next room, within earshot, and the venom in her mother-in-law's voice made her stop in her tracks. This wasn't the grieving mother she performed for the cameras. This wasn't even the manipulative but saccharine sweet mother she was to Amit's face. This was the real Sahna, raw and unfiltered. Sensing the importance of the moment, realizing that this was the truth she had been looking for, Priya did something she never thought she'd do. She quietly started a voice recording on her phone. What she captured is not just a smoking gun. It is a complete demolition of the entire favorite son narrative. It is the key that unlocks the true nature of Sahna's maternal love, revealing it to be nothing more than a cold, brutal business transaction. Before we reveal the exact words from that recording, we need to establish the core of our theory, a theory that this audio proves to be terrifyingly real. Sahna doesn't have a favorite son. Sahna has an investment portfolio. Her children were never just her children. They were assets. They were stocks in the family enterprise of pride and social standing, and she was the ruthless CEO managing their performance. Her love, her affection, her praise was never a gift. It was capital, to be invested in the asset with the most potential for growth, and to be withdrawn vengefully from the one that failed to meet projections. In this portfolio, Sumit was always the blue chip stock. He was the high-risk, high-reward investment. He was charismatic, smarter, and had the potential to climb higher in society than anyone else in their immediate family. He was the one who was supposed to marry well, secure a powerful job, and elevate the family name to a new level of respectability. He was the Google, the Apple of her two sons. Sahna poured all her resources into him, not out of a deeper love, but because he promised the greatest return on investment. Her pride in him was the pride of a hedge fund manager who picked a winner. All her hopes and dreams for the family's future were bundled into the success of this single promising stock. Amit, on the other hand, was the safe, reliable government bond. He was never going to skyrocket, but he was stable. He would do as he was told, marry the right girl, have a respectable job, and never cause any trouble. He provided a steady, if unimpressive, dividend of predictability. In a booming market, you ignore your bonds and focus on your high-growth tech stocks. And that's exactly what Sahna did. For most of their lives, Amit was the background asset, the safe bet she never had to worry about, but also one she never got excited about. The attention, the pressure, the expectations were all heaped on Sumit. Then came Jenny. The arrival of Jenny, in this cold financial analogy, was the equivalent of a catastrophic market crash. Suddenly, her blue-chip stock, the one she had banked her entire future on, declared emotional and social bankruptcy. He wasn't just underperforming. He was intentionally liquidating his own value in her eyes. He chose a path that would yield zero return on her investment of pride, honor, and social standing. He actively chose to become, in her view, a worthless asset. Now, understand this crucial point. Sahna's rage and grief were not the reactions of a mother whose son had broken her heart. They were the furious, incandescent rage of a CEO whose star company had been deliberately run into the ground by a rogue executive. Her fury wasn't born of lost love. It was born of a lost investment. Sumit hadn't betrayed her heart. He had betrayed her portfolio. He had squandered the potential she had so carefully cultivated. He took her decades of investment, her care, her upbringing, her social coaching, and set it all on fire for a woman she considered a liability. This is why her attacks on him were so vicious and so public. When a company fails, the CEO doesn't just quietly grieve. They go on a public relations war. They blame the rogue executive, they trash their reputation, they try to salvage the brand. Sahna's televised breakdowns, her dramatic pronouncements of shame, her weeping, it was all damage control. It was her standing before the board of directors society, her extended family, her neighbors, and screaming, "This was not my fault. This was a rogue actor. The rest of the company is still strong." She had to publicly condemn Sumit to protect her own social stock value. And what happens when your number one asset crashes and burns? You turn to the rest of your portfolio. You have to. You desperately reevaluate your other holdings to see what can be salvaged. Suddenly, Amit, the boring, predictable government bond, was her only remaining asset. And Sahna, the master portfolio manager, decided it was time to reallocate her resources. She couldn't let another investment fail. So she began a campaign not of love, but of aggressive asset management. She started pumping all her capital, her praise, her attention, and her victimhood into Amit. She needed to inflate his value, not for his sake, but for hers. She needed to control him, to mold him into a new, more powerful tool to either punish Sumit or, at the very least, to serve as a shining example of a good investment to show off to the world. This brings us back to that quiet afternoon, to Priya's phone, and to the words that Sahna spoke when she thought no one was listening. The conversation was with her sister, a person with whom she could be brutally honest. Her sister had apparently asked about how she was coping and how Amit was helping. Sahna's response is the single most damning piece of evidence in the tragic history of this family. The recording starts with Sahna sighing, a sound of deep, profound frustration. And then she speaks. The words, as transcribed from the audio, are as follows. Helping? He tries. He does what I tell him. But it's not the same. Amit is not as successful as his cousins. He's a good boy. He listens, but there's no fire there. His wife, she's content with their little life, their small world. There's no ambition. You can't build an empire on dependability. People don't respect dependability. They respect power. They respect success. It was never supposed to be Amit carrying the family name. There's a pause on the recording, and you can hear her voice fill with a mix of genuine rage and something that sounds like bitter nostalgia. Then she delivers the final devastating blow. Sumit was always the smarter one, the one with more potential before that woman ruined him. He was sharp, he was charismatic, people listened when he spoke. He could have married into any family. He could have been a true leader in the community. He was supposed to be the one to bring honor to this family. Real honor. The one to make everyone look at us with envy. He was my blue chip stock, my prize investment, and now look at him. He's worthless. He crashed himself, and for what? An old American woman with no family, no status? He's a joke. So now I have Amit. He's all that's left. I have to make do. I have to use him to fix the mess his brother made. What other choice do I have? Let those words sink in. He's all that's left. I have to make do. I have to use him. This is not the language of a mother. It is the language of a ruthless strategist left with limited options after a catastrophic failure. She isn't turning to Amit out of love or because she suddenly appreciates his quiet loyalty. She's turning to him out of sheer pragmatic necessity. He is her consolation prize, her praise, her recent reliance on him, the favorite son status she has bestowed upon him. It's all a lie. It is a calculated strategy to control her last remaining asset. She doesn't love him more now. She just needs him more. He is a tool, a pawn in her game to reclaim some of the family honor she believes Sumit stole from her. This recording proves the theory in its entirety. Her love is and always has been transactional and conditional. She doesn't see children, she sees outcomes. She doesn't see sons, she sees stocks. Sumit's betrayal wasn't personal, it was financial. Amit's loyalty isn't cherished, it's being leveraged. The entire family dynamic we've witnessed is a lie, a carefully constructed piece of theater directed by a woman who is the ultimate emotional puppeteer. She pulls the strings of guilt on Sumit and the strings of pride on Amit, all for her own benefit. The brothers' rivalry wasn't a natural sibling issue. It was engineered. She fanned the flames, she created the division, because it was easier to control them if they were at odds with each other. A united front would be a threat to her absolute authority. Think back to every scene you've ever watched. Re-examine it through this new lens. Every time she cried about Sumit's choices, she was mourning her crashed stock. Every time she praised Amit for being by her side, she was grooming her new asset, preparing him to be deployed. The emotional blackmail, the threats of being ostracized, the dramatic health scares, all of it can be seen as hostile takeover tactics. She is a corporate raider of her own family, seeking to acquire and control the emotional resources of her children for her own personal gain, which she cloaks in the language of family honor. Priya, holding this recording, was faced with a terrible choice. To keep it secret would be to allow her husband to continue being a puppet, to live a lie where he believes he has finally earned his mother's genuine affection. He would continue to be used as a weapon against his own brother, driving the wedge between them deeper and deeper until the relationship was irreparable. He would be performing for an approval that wasn't even real, an illusion crafted out of his mother's desperation. The family would remain fractured, but the lie would hold, and perhaps a fragile, artificial peace could be maintained. But to reveal it? To reveal the recording would mean detonating a bomb in the heart of their family. It would mean forcing her husband, Amit, to confront a devastating truth that the mother he has been defending, the mother whose approval he has finally won, sees him as a second-best option, a tool of convenience. It would force him to realize that her praise is poison and her reliance on him is a cage. The revelation would shatter the very foundation of his identity as the good son. It would expose his mother's lifelong campaign of emotional manipulation and would likely destroy his relationship with her forever. But it would also have another, perhaps more powerful effect. It could be the one thing, the only thing that could finally end the rivalry between the brothers. It could be the cataclysm that forges a new alliance, uniting Amit and Sumit not as rivals for their mother's conditional love, but as fellow survivors of her emotional tyranny. Priya knew what she had to do. The pain of the truth was better than the slow-acting poison of the lie. She couldn't watch her husband be so thoroughly and cynically used. She had to show him the recording. She had to set him free, even if the freedom would come at an excruciating cost. The stage was set for a reckoning, a moment of truth that had been decades in the making. A moment that would either destroy what was left of the family or perhaps rebuild it on a foundation of truth for the very first time. What happens when a man discovers his mother's love was the greatest lie he was ever told? The moment Amit presses play is where everything changes forever. The reckoning began not with a bang, but with a click. The click of a button on a smartphone held in a trembling hand. Priya sat with her husband, Amit, in the quiet of their own living room, a space that was supposed to be a sanctuary from the endless family turmoil. She explained what she had done, her voice low but steady. She had recorded his mother. Amit's initial reaction was what you'd expect. A flash of anger, a surge of defensive loyalty. How could she? It was a betrayal of privacy, a breach of trust. He was about to launch into a lecture about respect for one's elders, the same lecture he had probably given Sumit 100 times. But he stopped. He saw the look in his wife's eyes. It wasn't malice, it was profound sadness. It was the look of someone trying to save him from a fire he didn't even know was burning. "Just listen," she said. "Please, just listen." And so, he did. He took the phone, his thumb hovering over the play icon. A man standing at the edge of a cliff, about to learn that the ground he'd been standing on his entire life was nothing but a carefully painted illusion. He pressed play. Can you imagine the silence in that room, broken only by the tinny sound of his mother's voice? A voice he knew better than his own heartbeat. A voice that had soothed him as a child, and more recently had praised him into a false sense of worth. At first, the words were just background noise, the familiar cadence of his mother complaining to her sister. He was likely preparing his defense for her, already formulating the excuses in his head. She's just stressed. She's emotional. She doesn't mean it. But then the daggers started to land, each one coated in a poison of casual dismissal he could no longer ignore. Amit is not as successful as his cousins. The first blow, a comparison, a judgment, a wound he had carried his whole life, the feeling of being adequate but never exceptional, now confirmed by the one person whose opinion mattered most. There's no ambition. The second blow. It invalidated his entire life's work, his stable career, the comfortable home he provided for his wife. He had always seen himself as responsible, as the bedrock of the family. He now heard that his mother saw him as a man made of sand. He could feel his throat tightening, the air in the room growing thick and heavy. He glanced at Priya, whose face was a mask of pained empathy. She wasn't gloating, she was grieving with him. The recording continued, and the worst was yet to come. His mother's tone shifted, her voice filling with that bitter energy when she spoke of the past, when she spoke of Sumit. Sumit was always the smarter one, the one with more potential. He was sharp, he was charismatic. It was everything Amit had always suspected but never allowed himself to believe. He wasn't just the second choice, he was the fundamentally inferior model. He was the safe, boring sedan, while Sumit was the high-performance sports car that had crashed. And then the ultimate confirmation, the phrase that would echo in his mind for years to come. He was my blue-chip stock. A stock, an investment, not a son. The entire architecture of his family, his understanding of his mother's love, crumbled into dust at that moment. The praise he had received in recent months, the feeling of finally being seen, of finally being the favored one, it all curdled into a sick joke. He wasn't the favorite. He was the emergency fund she was forced to cash in after her prized investment went bankrupt. The final words of the recording were the nails in the coffin of his lifelong delusion. He's all that's left. I have to make do. I have to use him to fix the mess his brother made. Use him. The words hung in the air long after the recording ended. Not love him, not cherish him, not rely on him. Use him. He was a tool, a means to an end, a janitor brought in to clean up the mess left by the star executive. The recent warmth from his mother wasn't the sun. It was the heat from a branding iron, marking him as her property, her instrument in a war he now realized he had been fighting on the wrong side. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a man whose entire personal history had just been rewritten as a lie. He didn't shout, he didn't weep, he just sat there, hollowed out, as decades of carefully constructed emotional scaffolding came crashing down around him. He finally understood. His mother's love was never a safe harbor. It was a stock market, and he had only become valuable to her when she had nowhere else to put her money. In that moment of shattering clarity, his entire life replayed in his mind, but with a new horrifying filter. Every memory was now tainted. Think back with us. Remember all those scenes where Sahna leaned on Amit, crying on his shoulder about Sumit's betrayal? We all saw a mother confiding in her loyal son, but Amit now saw the truth. He was seeing a CEO holding a crisis meeting with her remaining subordinate, outlining the public relations strategy to discredit a former partner. Her tears were not for a lost son, they were for a lost asset, and her embrace was not one of comfort, but of conscription. He was being drafted into her army. Remember the tense family gatherings where Amit, with a pained expression, would lecture Sumit? He would talk about duty, about family honor, about disrespecting their parents. He genuinely believed he was the voice of reason, the mediator trying to pull his wayward brother back into the fold. But now, with the words, "I have to use him," ringing in his ears, he saw himself for what he truly was, a puppet. His mother's words came out of his mouth. Her agenda was his script. He wasn't defending his family. He was enforcing his mother's corporate policy. He was the muscle she sent to intimidate her rogue asset into submission, and he had done it willingly, all for a pat on the head that he now knew was meaningless. Every compliment she had ever given him, "You are a good son, Amit. I can always count on you," was now exposed. They weren't terms of endearment. They were performance reviews. They were the verbal equivalent of a gold star, meant to keep the employee motivated and compliant. He had been so proud, so validated, thinking he had finally eclipsed his brother in his mother's eyes. The truth was so much crueler. He hadn't won a competition for her love. He had simply become the only employee left in a failed company, and she had promoted him not out of merit, but out of sheer desperation. He wasn't the CEO's favorite. He was just the last man standing. The weight of this lifelong manipulation finally settled on him. He looked at his wife, Priya, and for the first time, he saw the full extent of what she had been trying to protect him from. She hadn't been attacking his mother, she had been defending her husband. His anger was gone, replaced by a profound and quiet sense of gratitude. He had been living in a beautifully constructed prison, and she had just handed him the key. The bars were made of praise, the walls were built with guilt, and the warden was his own mother. Now, he was free. But the freedom was terrifying. What does a man do when he discovers the central relationship of his life was a fraud? The first step was clear. The rivalry was over. The game was exposed. There was only one other person on the planet who could truly understand the depth of this betrayal, because he had been the other playing piece on the board his entire life. He had to talk to Sumit. He picked up his phone, his hands surprisingly steady. This was no longer about Jenny, or tradition, or respect. This was about two brothers, two survivors of a lifelong campaign of emotional puppetry, finally comparing notes. We can only imagine that phone call, the tension on the line when Sumit answered, likely expecting another attack, another plea from his brother to abandon his life and placate their mother. But he wouldn't have heard anger in Amit's voice. He would have heard exhaustion, defeat, and a strange new kind of kinship. "Sumit," Amit would have said, his voice raw. "We need to talk. Not about Jenny, about Mom, about everything. I was wrong. You need to hear this." He played the recording for his brother over the phone. On the other end of the line, there wouldn't have been a shock from Sumit. There would have been a long, weary sigh of validation. Sumit had known this truth in his bones for years. It was why he had rebelled so fiercely. He was fighting not just for his love for Jenny, but for his right to be a person, not a project. He had been trying to divest from his mother's portfolio for a decade. What he had never had before was proof. He had never had an ally. Now, in the most unexpected way possible, he had both. The rivalry, so carefully cultivated by Sahna for decades, evaporated in that single phone call. It was never about them. It was never about Amit's stability versus Sumit's charisma. It was a fabricated contest designed to keep them divided and therefore easier to control. A united front would be unmanageable. Now, for the first time in their adult lives, they were a united front. They weren't the good son and the bad son anymore. They were just her sons, and they realized that the only way to win their mother's toxic game was to refuse to play. Their next move was the most difficult, but the most necessary. They had to confront her, together. They arranged to visit their parents' home. When Sahna opened the door and saw both her sons standing there, side by side, her initial reaction was likely one of confusion, perhaps even triumph. She probably thought her good son, Amit, had finally succeeded in talking sense into his rebellious brother. She probably thought Sumit was there to beg for forgiveness, with Amit as her loyal witness. The smile on her face would have been one of smug satisfaction, but that smile would have faded quickly. She would have noticed the look in their eyes. There was no conflict between them. The tension wasn't brother against brother. For the first time ever, the tension was directed squarely and silently at her. They sat in the living room, the same room where so many tears had been shed, so many ultimatums delivered. Sahna began to speak, likely starting one of her usual guilt-laden monologues, but Amit held up a hand, stopping her. The loyal, dependable son was taking control of the narrative. "Mom," he said, his voice devoid of the anger she might have expected, and filled instead with a chilling calm. "We're not here to fight. We're here to talk about your investments." The word hung in the air, a coded message that she would have understood instantly. Before she could react, before she could launch into her well-rehearsed performance of the wounded victim, Amit took out his phone. He didn't say another word. He just pressed play. She listened to her own voice fill the room, her private, ugly truths laid bare for her sons to hear. The blood drained from her face. We have seen Sahna cry. We have seen her rage. We have seen her scheme. But in that moment, for the first time, we would have seen her truly exposed, stripped of all her power, her primary tools of manipulation, praise, and pity rendered utterly useless by her own words. Her reaction would have been a masterclass in deflection. First, denial. "This is a lie. That's not what I meant. You are twisting my words." Then blame. "She did this. That wife of yours, Amit, she has poisoned you against your own mother. And you, Sumit, this is your fault, you and that woman." Finally, when all else failed, she would revert to her ultimate weapon, victimhood. "After everything I have sacrificed for this family, for you, this is how you repay me? You break my heart and now you conspire against me? I have no sons." But this time, it didn't work. The brothers didn't take the bait. They didn't argue. They didn't yell. They had heard the truth. Her performance was now just noise. When she finally fell silent, winded from her own theatrics, Sumit spoke for the first time, his voice calm and resolute. "It's over, Mom?" Amit nodded in agreement. "The competition is over," he added. "We are not your blue-chip stock or your consolation prize. We are your sons, and from now on, we will be brothers first. Our relationship with you will be on our terms. The manipulation stops today." It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a declaration of independence. They stood up together and walked out, leaving their mother alone in the silence, a queen with no subjects, a puppeteer whose strings had finally been cut. Her sons weren't children. They were assets in her portfolio of pride. Is this the most toxic form of parenting? To view your own flesh and blood not as people to be loved unconditionally, but as investments to be managed for maximum social return? Sahna lost more than just control that day. She lost the very sons she claimed to be fighting for, because she never truly saw them at all. She only ever saw their stock price. The brothers are now free, but the road ahead is long. They have to rebuild a relationship that was intentionally poisoned from the start. And they have to decide what, if any, role their mother will play in their new, honest lives. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the brothers should do now? Should they walk away for good? Or is there a path to a new kind of family, one built on harsh truths instead of beautiful lies? Was Priya a hero for exposing the secret, or did she detonate a bomb that will cause irreparable harm? Tell us what you think below, and if you want more insider reports that get to the heart of the 90-day drama, make sure you're subscribed.